it's Ruthie from Star Skills here. Welcome to our final practice. Today we're going to talk about the Early Years Learning Framework, Assessment for Learning. So let's get started. So the primary purpose of assessment is to enhance learning. Educators assess learning so it guides day-to-day teaching and curriculum development. We find out, make sense, and use what you have learned to facilitate ongoing learning. Assessment of children's learning involves an ongoing cycle that includes planning, documenting, and evaluating children's learning. Assessment refers to the process of gathering and analysing information, where you see what children can do and understand. Assessment needs to be authentic, needs to be in a meaningful context, it needs to reflect ways in which children learn, and you also need to be mindful that you need to have a range of assessment tools and strategies. Now it's interesting to note that we have assessment of learning, assessment as learning, and assessment for learning. I'm just going to discuss each of those. So when we're talking about assessment of learning describes what children can do at different points in time. And the types of assessments that you would do would be reports, rubrics, achievement standards, or agreed upon achievement standards in your early learning setting. Assessment can also be used as learning. So it involves feedback for children about their learning. It creates significant documentation for memorable moments in children's learning, and it celebrates learning. Examples of this are portfolios and learning folders, child and educator meetings, and self-reflection. And finally, assessment for learning. Assessment for learning involves an ongoing process that is reflected in planning and assessment alongside learning. Examples of this would be learning stories, anecdotal records, running records, child profiles, and first steps continua. Now, key questions that you need to ask when you are assessing. So when you're looking at children playing or learning, what is happening? What seems important as you are observing? Are you learning something new about the child? And based on that, where to now? Here's how to assess learning. You observe learning. Secondly, you understand children's learning and make valid and reliable judgments. And finally, you put your understanding to good use for the benefit of the children and also the curriculum, where you're going with each child and the class as a group. So what are we actually assessing when we talk about assessment? Well, there are a number of things. We are looking at what the children know, who they are, their interests, their personalities, their strengths, their abilities, how they relate to others and how they cope. We're looking at how they transition, how they settle when coming into their learning setting and things like that, and how effective our curriculum is for a specific group of children. We're looking at how the children are progressing developmentally, and what will come next for each child and their learning needs. We're assessing who requires early intervention, and we're also assessing how we're going with the Early Years Learning Framework as a whole. Now we need to work together to collect data. So as an educator, the types of things that we're doing to get data, we're doing things like observing, so we can I have a sheet with all the children's names on there, and it's really an observation matrix, and as I see things I can just jot things down on that piece of paper. Learning stories, anecdotal records, checklists, video, learning profiles, work samples. Those are the types of things that I'm getting together to collate data. But there's also data that you can get from families and other interested parties. So surveys, information from surveys, interviews that you have with parents and caregivers, child profiles, other professionals, so people like occupational therapists, maybe there's a pediatrician involved in that particular child, those types of professionals. Communication books, your communication board. So that could be ongoing data that you're collating and collecting throughout the year. Now, it's very important. Here's a great quote from Hirsch and Pasek. Playing children are motivated children. Young children really demonstrate their depth of learning through pencil and paper tasks. Now, this is particularly important when we are talking about assessment, because we need real context and we need to understand how children learn through play, and they learn through doing. And often with young children, getting them to do paper tasks, writing things down, it's not appropriate. So I'm going to show you, just give you a snapshot of what I've done as a means of assessment. It might get you inspired. These resources that I'm going to show are resources in the club, and you have access to them. But I'm just going to show you some of the things that I've done. So we have portfolios within our early learning setting, and one of the things I love to do is basically on the first day I take a picture of each child and I use that picture as the cover for the portfolio. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful memory, and that's just how I do it. You can obviously do whatever you like for your portfolios or your learning folders, but that's what I do. Secondly, you can look at assessment and work out which tasks you're going to use to portray development. Drawing is one of those fantastic things that you can do. And in term 1, 2, 3, 4, I set aside an activity where they are going to draw something, and the parent over the course of the year can actually see the progress in their child's drawing. So within portfolios and assessment, I have a mixture of elements that I'm reflecting. So usually a hands-on activity with written quotes as you're observing children, and then I do love to include children's drawings because it shows their interpretation of what they are doing. So it's not just getting children to draw a picture, but it's a whole facet of what they're actually doing. So they are having a hands-on experience, they're talking, you're observing, you're listening, you're writing things down, and then they're drawing. So it's a whole experience. Now, my portfolios do follow our 40 weeks, and you can have access to all those files in the Star Skills Club. But there's a page that we did that relates to the homework and the learning that has been happening. So basically, the portfolio reflects what they've been doing weekly. It's just a little glimpse. So portfolios need to also be a balanced selection of appropriate activities. So you need to have a range. You need to consider the range of what you're actually showing parents. So you can do skills development, you can portray hands-on activities, play in your setting, learning stories. And one thing that's really important is portraying great memories, because really it's such an important time in a child's life. They never go back to those years really, but if you can keep it as a snapshot of memories for parents and for families, it's a really special thing to be able to do. The one thing I love to do is educate parents about why play is important. So I'll include some of the teacher language in what children are learning throughout the portfolio, so they can see that children are learning important things as they play. Another thing, using craft activities to assess learning. For example, the testing of shapes can be done in an activity and in a very informal way. Using photos of a child's work is a brilliant thing to do. Here's one of my favorite activities to do. Every child is different that comes into our kindy, and one of the things that we do is we do a pop stick creation, and each child has to make a creation and they can do whatever they like, and every pop stick creation that we see is different. But it's amazing because you actually get to see their personality coming out through their art. And these kinds of experiences can become valuable assessment pieces. So for example, I have a young student who her parents are both police officers, and she created when she did her artwork, she just created a square full of pop sticks. It was very, very structured, and you can see in her personality she was a very organized practical kind of girl, and her art reflected that. So use art experiences to reflect who they are, their personality, and the assessment of activities. Here's another example. Again, using, we were creating patterns on a little pasta necklace, an activity that you might do, but then I included the element of getting them to do stamping and seeing if children were ready for extension or they needed remedial work with patterning. So it's just a fun way to present it. You've got the learning that happens that is written down, you've got a photo of the child, of what they created, but then you've also got the dot picture on the right there to see where they're actually going in terms of their mathematical development. So again, children's drawings are very important, particularly when they draw their families. You can learn so much about a child by how they draw their family. How big is each person? It might show, how important is each person to that particular child. Where are the members placed on the page? Who is considered important? One of the things that I've picked up over the years is children that have experienced trauma will often colour in, scribble things in black. And so things like that, you can look for little clues about what might be going on at home through the children's drawing. So an important task there, getting children to draw their families. Observational drawings. Here's just a great thing that I love to look at when you're looking at their drawing, is how they observe things through their drawing. Great activity. Other things to highlight in your portfolios and through assessment are what are the activities that students are drawn to. So highlighting the interests of each child in their portfolio is particularly important, and interviewing them about what they've learnt as well in that process. I'm including memorable days and moments are important. And also when you're assessing, we have spoken about learning profiles, but collecting data that reflects, that you can put onto the learning profile that can actually create a picture of where the child is, and then from that information you can make a plan about where that child needs to go. Now when we're talking about an ongoing cycle of learning and reflection, we're observing, we're taking notes anecdotally, but the EYLF planner that is there for you to download is there for you to also be mindful of what teaching is occurring, what activities you're going to do, what activities maybe that you are planning for in a week's time based on your observations, what assessment you are focusing on, and also notes. So there's the planner that you can use on a weekly basis, jotting things down, and really having a curriculum that is alive for the students that are in your care. Now the other thing that I've got is that you may have noticed in the Star Skills Club are editable learning stories, and I just want to quickly show you how I've used them. Now often sometimes it can be quite time consuming to work out exactly what children are learning through play. So I've created these editable learning stories that you can basically have as a PowerPoint. It's in PowerPoint and you can copy and paste. So there's an example of a template that I've got, and I've copy and pasted it into a practical assessment piece for a student. So here we go. I've just copied and pasted it in a PowerPoint. And I've put a photo of the child and a quote with what they were saying. And then on the right, I've said Matthew is learning a great deal when he plays with dinosaurs. Now I've copied and pasted that on the right. So you don't have to think about, oh, what are they actually learning? Well, just copy and paste it, save time, but then personalize it with a photo and a quote or a story as you've observed. So it certainly makes things a lot easier for you as you are creating learning stories as part of your assessment. So I hope you get a lot of benefit from those learning stories.